and welcome, fellow bookworms and film fans. Welcome to this week's episode of The Contented Narrative. This week we're looking at The Lovely Bones by Alice Sebold. This was actually picked by my sister Jessica, and this is a guest star episode. We're finally able to go back into the guest star episodes. We've only done one so far, which was Joe and A Monster Calls, but we will be getting more in the coming months. I believe my other sister Nikki we're going to be doing that one in a couple of months, and we're doing The Little Prince for that one. So first things first, we're going to discuss how we liked the film, then we're going to discuss how we liked the book, and then we're just going to have a little bit of a discussion about the similarities and the differences between the book and the film. This time we're not going to go into the entirety of the plot, but we will do in future book to film adaptations. So first things first, film, what do we think?
Mixed feelings.
Okay.
I don't want to get into why I don't like it as much, because a lot of the reasons I don't like the movie as much is because I like the book, and that will come later. The
Very
movie,
common occurrence.
on its own, it felt a little bit dragged out. There were scenes, the CGI scenes tended to be much longer than they needed to be. I feel like the director just got a bit excited with the ability to use CGI instead of actually focusing on the plot. There were a large number of good parts of it. The actors were incredible. The cast was amazing for the movie.
Mark Wahlberg, by the way, that guy
So
can
good.
really act. It was actually going to be given to somebody else originally, and they turned it down. Ryan Gosling, yeah. I honestly don't think I couldn't see Ryan Gosling in the part now that I've seen Mark Wahlberg in the part. Honestly, he's just so much better. Now I did sort of enjoy the film. The bits that I didn't like was Heaven. So her interpretation of heaven, well, the director's interpretation of heaven, is so much different in the book, but we'll discuss that in a moment. But it was very sort of like, as you said, it like overuse of CGI. There was no tangible sort of like heaven, as it were. She was just on her own in an in-between, and I think they did refer to it as the in-between a few times, so it wasn't actually like heaven. It was more, this is where she's going to go until she goes on to heaven. But the end of the film left me both satisfied and really pissed off at the same time, don't you think? So I was satisfied because obviously Mr. Harvey gets what he deserves. I mean, I really wish he'd been brought to justice in that respect, but he got what he deserved. He couldn't kill anyone else. But also really disappointed because there's the final sort of like semi-final scene is when, you know, Susie Salmon, the titular character, comes back into Ruth's body, who's a classmate of hers, and as she's sort of like talking to Ray, who she had a crush on, Mr. Harvey, with the help of some random person, is tipping her body in the safe into the sinkhole. And I genuinely was sat there going, oh, they're going to figure out the body's in there. They're going to figure out the body's in there. And they never did. And the body just disappears into oblivion. Susie makes out with Ray and then she moves on. And it's sort of like, I was just like, I mean, that's a little bit annoying. But like, apart from the in-between heaven, whatever it was scenes, I enjoyed the plot. I did. It's an interesting one to do when you're doing it from the point of view of a dead 14-year-old girl. And it was interesting to see sort of like how the death of a child affects each person so differently that you can be working as a fully functioning team but working on two different pages. I mean, what was your... So overall, I probably would have given the film maybe a 6 out of 10. What about yourself there, Jess? What do you think?
I think similar. 6, maybe even a 5.
So what did you think of the ending, by the way? That face just says it all.
When I was watching the movie, I hadn't read the book yet, and I really spent the entire time being like, they're going to catch him. They're going to catch him. We're so close. We're almost there. You know, he has the body in his house for ages, and I'm like, okay, you know, it's building up all of this tension. The Lindsay breaks in, you know, and you're like, oh my gosh, she's gonna find it.
That was a great scene.
That was an incredible scene.
That got me. That, like, honestly,
probably my favorite scene in the entire movie was that scene. And so when you're in there and you're like waiting, and all this build up, and then you get to the end of the movie, and they toss the body in, and it ends, and then
because he gets taken up by an icicle that drops down the icicle doesn't even kill him. The icicle distracts him. He slips and then he falls down a ravine with really bad CGI of his body falling down a ravine. Terrible. By the way, horrific CGI.
They spent the full budget on the heaven scenes.
Yeah, but I know exactly what you mean.
And it just felt like such a waste. And then, okay, I'm not going to get into the book yet.
Yeah, so that's so 5 out of 10 from Jess, 6 out of 10 from myself. So now, the book. So 2 completely different covers, by the way. Like,
yeah,
honestly,
this is the movie cover.
Yeah, that's the movie cover, and this is, I think, one of the original covers. So, okay, so first things first, what do you think about the book?
I loved it. I really enjoyed it. I read it in 2 days, which is probably the fastest I've read a book in ages. It was really interesting. The characters were really well developed. I think the only thing I didn't enjoy about it, and this isn't because of bad writing on the author's part at all, was we, in the book, get a lot more from Mr. Harvey's perspective.
Yes, we do.
We do have to hear his thoughts. I don't want to hear his thoughts. He's not a pleasant person to be in the head of. And so when you're in his mind, it's just very uncomfortable. But that's what you'd expect, being in the head of a serial killer.
I mean, when you think about it as well, because, like, so the characters, do they feel different in the book?
Definitely. But I always get that with books. They're always more fleshed out because you can hear a lot more, you can connect with them much easier, and you have a lot more time with them.
So did you find that you liked the characters more in the book than you did in the film, maybe?
I found them more interesting. I think in the movie I liked the dad more because you don't see a lot of his, like, pitfalls as a person in the movie.
That is true.
You don't get enough time with him to actually be like, the things you're doing maybe aren't the best. You're actually neglecting your children a fair amount. Understandably, you're going through a lot of grief, but also you're putting a lot on your children to make you better, and it's not their responsibility. Or scenes like that. His relationship with his son in the book was a lot more important.
Oh, yeah.
Like, so much more important. And then when you get to the movie, I'm doing it again, I'm comparing them already.
Yeah, so just stick with what you think of the book.
But the relationship with the son in the book is incredible. Susie, at a certain point, starts to feel a little voyeuristic. She's constantly, like, in everyone's business.
Yeah.
Lindsay's really trying her best to live her life, and Susie's just watching her constantly, which makes you feel a bit like you're invading Lindsay as well. But that isn't really a criticism. I feel like that's the sort of thing a child at 14 would do, especially if she didn't have the opportunity to do a lot of these things, and so she's living all of these experiences through someone else, which is the whole point of the book, really. So.
I mean, strangely, I did like the book. I found that it got to a point though where it was starting to drag for me. The heaven scenes were really good because you saw it from her point of view, and you had a lovely description of, like, all these dogs that come out at, like, sunset. Oh my god, I was like, I'm surrounded by dogs. That's my idea of heaven. I did find Lindsay a little bit annoying towards the end. And I did kind of just want it to end at one point. And I mean, Mr. Harvey, again, he goes on the run, you get his point of view. And again, he's not brought to justice in the book either. So at least they stuck with that with the film. But it started off really good, and I did enjoy it. And then you got the flashback scenes, and then you got Lindsay, who was, like, moving on with her life. And her relationship with, was it Samuel?
Yes. In
the book was so sweet. Honestly, was so sweet. And the fact that, like, Samuel, you know, proposes to her, she says yes, and then they find the perfect little house. And it's just, but I find you saw a lot more of the grief in the book, and it is more tangible. But I do really think that, like, sort of towards the end, I was kind of just dragging myself through it, and I just wanted to get to the end. I felt like they'd reached the point where they could have ended it, but they continued writing. So for me, I think probably the book gets a 5 out of 10. It's not the best for me. I think it's maybe because I'm not a young girl anymore, so and I can't sympathize with the main character. I just found her a little bit. At first, I was really like, oh my god, that poor child. She's not going to experience anything. You know, she's got killed at 14, and it was a lot more graphic, her scene when she dies. Like it did make me feel a little bit uncomfortable reading it, because it was very graphic with what happens between, obviously, an adult who is killing a child for a young woman for obvious reasons. But I do feel like there was a point where they could have just sort of like brought it to an end, but it felt like it was repeating itself at times, especially with the alcoholism, and the mum having issues with who she was and going off and sleeping with a police detective and then running off to a cabin for a couple of months and then coming back and deciding she wants to be part of the life. And the grandma just like coming in and then leaving and then coming in and then leaving. And I was like, you could have just stopped. But I mean, that's just my point of view. It is a good book. I just did struggle with the end. But what did you think of the book? What rating would you give it?
I give it probably a 7.
7 out of 10?
I really quite enjoyed it.
A reread for you?
I don't know, because it very much gives you the entire story. There isn't much you need to reread to understand. There are some books where you have to reread it because maybe there's a deeper meaning or something that you've missed. Whereas I feel like this book, it gives you the plot, and it gives you the plot quite clearly. So I don't feel like I need to reread it to understand.
Oh yeah, no, I don't reread things to try and understand the book. I reread them because I just love the book. I will literally just go, oh, I'm just going to reread this book now. I think I've reread the series of Unfortunate Events books way too many times to count. I mean, I love those books. Okay, so that's the film, that's the book. So now we're just going to have a loose discussion about the plot. So obviously we have had a very loose discussion just at the beginning there, but the heaven scenes are first of all. Now, in the book, they're described as being a tangible place. There's other people there. She's not alone. She's got a couple of friends around her. There's Franny, is it?
Yeah, the other victims.
Franny's the one as well that is sort of like matron to them, kind of like her and one of the other victims. And you know, they describe it really well, and there's a lovely description about, you know, as the sun goes down and people are playing some music and like, but then in the film, it's just very. It's hard to describe. It's like at one point she's running through the wheat of corn and then she's at a giant tree. Another point she's trying to like reach someone and then she's got this bandstand that she's always on. I felt I didn't like it. I didn't like what they did with Heaven in the film. I think that was very, very different. So other differences, what do you reckon?
They cut my favourite character, which was Ray's mother, so I was not pleased with that.
We're not going to try and pronounce her name because it's a lovely name, but
She was my favourite character and she got cut. And I think she was a really interesting parallel to Susie's mum. And Susie's mum's entire journey sort of gets sidelined. In the movie, she disappears and then comes back, but you don't really see much of her character actually develop. Or the like crisis she's going through with like her identity and who she wanted to be. There was... They do mention this in the movie, The Camera.
Oh, yeah, but then it's not... I mean, I think the camera, believe it or not, I think the camera was actually a bigger thing in the movie than it was in the book.
Yes.
Because in the movie, it becomes a thing where he's like, I need to develop every single one, and then he gets to the last one, and that's when he sees a picture of Mr. Harvey that Susie had taken, and then he goes, hang on a minute, why have I not considered the only man who lives by himself on the street when he's going through his list of suspects? And that's what kind of tips him there. But he becomes a lot more suspicious of Mr. Harvey a lot earlier in the book than he does in the film.
And he becomes suspicious of Mr. Harvey because of the wife incident, where he names the wrong woman for his wife.
Yeah.
His dead wife keeps changing identities.
Because as we see in the book, the reason the dead wife's name keeps changing identities is because it's whatever the latest victim's name was. And he can't keep them straight because he's never had a dead wife. But the thing is as well, is in the book it's very straightforward as to why he starts, and he's like, hang on a minute, the wife I don't get it. Like, it's a different name, and then he starts thinking. In the film, it's like a scene where he sees the dead, like, rose bushes or whatever, and then Susie in between wills this little rose to come alive. It comes alive in his hand, and he's like, you're the killer. And it just feels a bit sort of like, okay. But as you said as well, the dad's relationship with the son as well, Buckley, is completely different.
Yeah.
In the film, he's very much obsessed with Susie. And even when Susie kind of lets him go, it's still like you don't really see him reconnect with the other children. Whereas in the book, you get such a lovely little, like when he's recuperating from when he gets the beat within an inch of his life by like a jock, because he thinks it's Mr. Harvey and he's trying to go in and kill, and it's actually a girl from the school.
Yes.
And he's recuperating and he starts building up his relationship with Buckley, and I think that's really, really sweet.
Also in the book you get a lot more on how the situation affects Lindsay.
Yes.
because you see a lot of her going out into school and like being the dead girl's sister.
Yeah.
You see her going to like camp, and then there are like scenes.
Oh,
that,
I
like,
love that camp scene.
Oh, it's exquisite. It's like it's just much better in my opinion.
I mean, obviously we understand why they cut things in the film.
Yeah.
But considering the film was over 2 hours long and there was a lot
Yes.
of unnecessarily in between scenes, and there was a lot of build up as well. So the book starts with her dying, and then we get the flashbacks throughout the book. Whereas the film, you get the whole sort of like childhood and the build up, and then she dies, and then it's dealing with it afterwards. I feel like if they'd have kept the structure similar to how it is in the book, they probably could have kept a lot more in from the book.
Yeah.
Because I mean, the film was over 2 hours long, so there was no need for them to have to have cut things that they did. But what I do find is, I mean, in both they do keep Mr. Harvey's death the same, and he escapes. It's so weird because in the book, doesn't he sort of like, the police come and question him again and he acts all normal, and then suddenly he packs up and he leaves.
Yes.
Whereas in the film, he leaves literally as soon as he realises that Susie's dad has started to suspect him. He packs up and goes. And it's just, yeah, I feel like if they'd have just readjusted the way they did the film, they could have fit a lot more in, and a lot more of the sweeter parts as well.
Yes.
But I mean, is there any other glaring differences or very good similarities?
I
like Ruth.
Ruth.
She got done the dirty.
She got
in the film.
Absolutely. She was also one of my favorite characters in the book. I think she was interesting. I think the way that she was described was just fascinating. And then thinking back on it, because I watched the movie before I read the book, which is the order I would recommend it to anyone, because it's the only way you can.
It's the way I did it, yeah.
But like looking back on the movie after reading the book, not the same character at all. She was barely in the movie, and when she was, she annoyed me a little. So,
because she was just a plot point because of the fact that she could sense Susie when Susie died, so Susie used her to get more from her life. But like in the book, and I did notice as well in the book, you get a bit where like sort of like they're all growing up, and you see Ruth going off to New York, and she's really good. And she's a fully fleshed character, and you get Ray as well. Ray goes off to medical school and they stay friends. In fact, I believe there's sort of like a hint of, do you reckon it's bisexuality? Because she does end up with a relationship with Ray, but she does also mention Ruth mentions that she also has a thing for a couple of other women. So I think, but you get none of that. You only get a little bit of Ray and Ruth's friendship. You don't really see much else other than that. And there's those really sweet scenes as well where they're first meeting in like the cornfields before school, and they're sharing like their little cups of tea.
They skipped the cornfield scene when everyone goes and lights a candle.
Oh yeah, so that was
Susie.
that could have easily been in the film. And what it is an impromptu sort of like memorial for Susie, sort of like her final goodbye. It was on the year anniversary, and they all the neighbours come out, and there's friendship and everything like that, like you'd see in a small village. And it's really sweet in the book, and you read it and you go, oh, that's lovely. Like it's absolutely lovely. And they're saying goodbye, and they're showing that they've still got support. You see nothing like that in the film. It's like she only exists in the minds of her family and Ruth and Ray. No one else. You see nothing else. And I feel like they could have done better. So I mean, is there any sort of anything else plot wise?
Well, okay, my final thoughts. I think they toned down the topic of the book an awful lot in order to make it a movie. They made it a lot more, I hesitate to say family friendly, considering it is a book about like a movie about someone being murdered. But they took away a lot of the things that made the characters human and flawed, and they sort of glazed over a lot of them to speed through the process and to use their pretty CGI. And
she really doesn't like the CGI.
I really don't like the CGI.
You'll see if you watch it.
And I feel like it could have been like the content from the book. It didn't need to all be there. I point out a lot of things that weren't in the movie, and I understand that you do have to cut some things in order to make a movie watchable. You can't have everyone's inner thoughts constantly. Constant narration would completely destroy it. But the actual depth of the characters was lost so much that after watching the movie, I honestly didn't particularly care that much about any of the characters. I mean, I felt sad while watching it, but afterwards I had absolutely no lasting impact. Reading the book, all of the characters were just so much more developed, so much more interesting, so much more flawed, and more three-dimensional considering they're in pages. So I still stand by my book considerably better.
No, that's fine. So I think plot wise, it kept sort of like the core points, but it warped them a little bit. The heaven scenes they changed. They cut out characters that I feel would have made the film a little bit better. They cut out, as you said, like the relationships and the depths of some of the characters for some unknown reason. And personally, the plot, it gets about 3 out of 10 for me. I feel like they had literally the bare minimum of what they needed. But obviously this is our own opinion. If you agree or disagree with anything, please do leave it below in the comments. If you want to click subscribe, then you'll be alerted whenever a new video comes out. Thank you so much for all your continued support there, guys. And remember to always keep it contento.